What up, guys? High school only? Yes. I'm excited. I don't know about you guys, but more hot sauce. I win. How was that? Heard a lot. I had some in study hall just a little bit, and it burned a little bit. It wasn't pleasant. Anyway, welcome to chapel. Just a few things real quick. One, the t-shirt contest. This is the last day to vote, so we'll find results out next week. But if you want to get your vote in, get your say in. The voting's right outside Mr. Smith's office. There's some pretty cool designs out there. 1711. I didn't say that. Anyway, can I have the ladies soccer team come up? We're gonna congratulate them real quick. Just come up here. They have their game tomorrow for district champions, I believe. Tomorrow at 6 o'clock. I think we're taking some bands from here, up to like 13 people or something like that. So if you guys are really wanting to go, it's not around here. But someone said something. I don't know what they said. So if you guys want to go, but you can't get a ride, there's sign-ups, I believe, in the office. Is it? Alright, let's give it up for the ladies soccer team, and then... I'm going to pray for you guys real quick, and then we're going to pray in the worship. So come back now. Alright, pray with me. Dear Lord, thank you for this team of ladies and their skill and dedication toward the beautiful game of soccer. And I just pray that you'll be with them tomorrow as they prepare their minds and their hearts for their game. And I pray that you'll just be with them during the game, be with the refs and the other team. You'll just give the refs wisdom. And yeah, I just pray for an awesome game tomorrow and bless them as they go out throughout their season. Amen.
I felt like this was kind of fun to do this. Why not play a breakup song? We're talking about relationships and sex. And if for some reason you feel like after this, I'm not saying that you're going to, I'm saying, but for some reason you felt like God was leading you to get out of a relationship after our discussion today, Seagraves can't be hired, and he will come and sing that song to your significant other. If you are that significant other and Seagraves shows up at your door with a guitar, might as well figure now it's over. Okay? Just get that going. It's an easy out in case you needed it. I'll offer the services of Seagraves. Like I said, today we've been talking about these guardrails, right? Last week we talked about guardrails. And as promised, I said this week we would talk about some relationships. We talk about the sex word. And I think this is an interesting time. And I'm going to tell you right now, there's a piece of me that's really excited about this, that's pumped for you guys. There's also a piece of me that's extremely nervous about just having this kind of conversation with you guys. Because I know that after 7 years of working specifically with students in Troy Christian, and after living 29 years of life, let's say 19 of those in a adolescent, hormonally charged state as a guy, I know more than ever that what the Bible says about sex and about relationships is more true and more relevant and more practical than ever before. But I also know that we live in a culture who completely disagrees with that, and who thinks that what the Scripture says, while it may have been good for a time, is just irrelevant and practical today. And so I know that I'm not coming in thinking that I'm going to lay out some stuff for you or to hand you guys a word and that you're going to walk away absolutely changed and ready to go in the next direction. It's going to take a process here. But I do want to just give you guys some basic truths on just a basic level of what Scripture teaches us about sex, about purity, about relationships, and then you can do with as what Solomon, as what we found out from Solomon last week. You can either be wise and surround yourself with wise people who know the difference between right and wrong and choose the right direction, or you can be a fool who knows right and wrong and still you don't care and you're going to go the direction you want to go. That's where I'm going to leave you guys today. It's interesting because I think it's funny that we talk about this. It doesn't embarrass me at all to talk about it. I'm telling you, for the 7 years that I've been here, I've had so many conversations with guys, not so much with girls. I leave that to the lady teachers. I'm not going to get involved in that one, but with guys, I've had so many conversations over the past 7 years, just about these things, about relationships, about sex, about pornography, and all of these things, right? And I've seen what it's done. So before we get into what God has told us about these things, before we even go into that subject, I just want to ask this question, and I want us to consider this. If we just look at the way our culture approaches sex, sexuality, sensuality, if we just look at just basic level, if we just look at the way we approach it, the way we market it, the way it's put out there on the internet, the way you guys are pressured through TV shows, music videos, relationships, friendships, things that happen outside of just normal life or whatever. If you just took that and you asked this question, is it working? Is that approach with sex and sexuality and relationships, does it work? If you be honest with yourself, you look at it and you're like, no way it doesn't work. It doesn't. What has it done for our society? Our approach with this, the way we put girls out there, the way we expect relationships to be physical, what's it done for us? Are we healthier because of it? Are families staying together longer because of our approach with it? They're not. And we can go through a list of the physical responses and consequences of this approach in our life. We can look at the pregnancies that we're not ready for. We can take a look at that. We can take a look at the STDs and the disease that have taken place. We can take a look at the broken relationships that happen as a result of this stuff, as a result of the approach to it. We can take a look at all of these things, and we can, I think, just on the basic level, we can say this isn't working. It's not helping us. My life is not better. Matter of fact, my life is more complicated now because of this stuff. And so if you were to see that, if you were to see our culture's approach and you were God, let's just, scarily enough, put yourself in God's shoes. If you were God, what would you say? What would you try to speak into this culture that's approaching sexuality that's God's created it? We'll get to that in just a second, but God's created it for this particular area, this thing that, and it's beautiful. He's created for that, and culture's taken it out of that context and just kind of throwing it out there, and it's not working, and all of these things are just falling apart. What would you say if you were God? Wait till you're ready. Right? Like last week. I mean, that's what culture's telling us. God would say the absolute opposite of what culture's saying. Because culture wants to make a buck. They sell sex all the time. They use sex to sell everything. They're trying to make money. God loves you. He cares about you. And I just want to throw this out there. I know that there's this gut reaction that takes place when we're heading there, because I think on a basic level, we know what Scripture teaches us about these things. I really want to kind of try to redefine some things for us, just kind of that culture's twisted. I really want to take a look at that. But I also know that right now you may be sitting next to someone who is like not wanting you to hear this. Or you may not be wanting to hear this. I'm going to give you freedom right now. I'll tell the person next to you, I'm trying to hear this right now. Right? Like that's where you can be right now. You tell the person, right? Just tell them, even if they want you to hear it, just say, hey, I'm trying to hear this right now. Go ahead. Tell that person next to you. I'm trying, there you go. You need to use the hand. Use the hand. Go. I'm trying to hear this right now. Okay? I want you guys to catch that. Again, we can take a look at the stuff that's taking place, just the physical results of the direction we've taken as a culture. We can say that it's not working. The broken families, the rape. I mean, we can go real heavy with the rape, the molestation that's taking place, the sex trafficking. There's some nasty stuff that's happening. There's also some things that we just don't take into account, like the emotional toll that our approach to sex takes on us. And I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but if you just look at the emotional toll, if you just sort of researching that, the emotional toll that just premarital sex has had on people, depression. There's a new documentary, I'm not seeing it, so I'm not saying go out and watch it, but I've been watching the reports on it. It's called Sexy Baby. It's the documentary that's been created recently. It's been on the news a lot, where they've been tracking these girls, and what they're tracking is the sexuality and sensuality of girls in our culture, what we've done for them, and what that's doing in their lives. Just the emotional disruption that takes place in our lives because of our approach to this stuff. And we can take a look at that, but I'm going to tell you right now, just based off of what I've been working through, there's something far greater than all of that stuff that's taking place when we go into this area, when we adopt culture's perspective of sexuality in our life. There's something far more at stake. STDs, we can deal with that. Pregnancy, we can work through that. Broken families, we can work through that. But there's something much more at stake in your life than just the physical results of this approach. So if you were God, what would you say? We're going to take a look at 1 Corinthians 6. That's where we're heading today. And I want us to catch a couple of these things here. That's written 2,000 years ago, but extremely profound in the respect of our approach with this stuff. And we're going to get into some guardrails later. But it would be terrible if we went through guardrails and you never understood why, the why behind. Why do we need guardrails? Where do we place guardrails? Where do we need these things at? And I think if you're honest with yourself, you would realize, you would recognize how our approach to this stuff is just made life more complicated and more difficult, and it's not working. That's why I'm saying at the beginning, that's why I said it is more relevant now than it ever has been before. So 1 Corinthians chapter 6, Paul is writing to a culture, a community in Corinth that viewed sex as just an activity. It was just a thing we did. Matter of fact, they tied it to religious experiences. You could, as a guy, you could go to the temple there, and you could essentially rent out a prostitute. And it was a religious experience. You would go do that, you do your thing there, and then you come back to your family, and have dinner, and life goes on. Like, no big deal. It's just something we do. It was just something that happened, and it didn't really matter. And so, what does God say? What would He say to us? And this is what He says. This is what He says through Paul to this culture that's, in a lot of respects, a lot like ours. He says in verse 18, He says, flee from sexual immorality. Flee from it. Run the other way. And here's the thing. We need to define this real quick because I think this is the hang-up. I think we'd all agree with that. We would read that. It's absolutely flee from sexual immorality. But what is sexual immorality? At what point does what we do become immoral? And so this is, and I know you may object to this, and that's all right. We can object to this, but I want to say, if we're going to talk about this from God's perspective and kind of understand why He's saying this, we need to understand what He means by this. And so when He talks about sexual morality, He means sexual or sensual outside of the context of marriage. Because when God created this concept, when he created, this is, Andy Stanley, I've been watching this stuff, this video that he's been doing, and he broke this down, and he explained it this way. He's like, God sits back at creation, when he creates Adam and Eve, and he gathers the angels around, he's like, check this out. Like, you think all that creation stuff was awesome. Watch this. And he brings the matches, and he brings the fuel, and he makes this thing called sex, this intimacy that takes place, and just breathes life onto it that is meant for this context between a husband and a wife in a marriage context where there is commitment. And it just blows them, it blows the angels away. Can you imagine seeing that for the first time? Everything else, like, man, you know, the animals do their thing, but it is nothing like what humans are experiencing here. And he creates that, but culture's taking it outside of that context. And it's kind of like this, it's kind of like a fire. Inside a fireplace, fire is awesome. It's incredible. All of our neighbors, for some reason, around our house have fireplaces. I wish we did, because we're on propane and it's crazy expensive. But if I wanted fire, you know, if I wanted to warm my house, I'm using propane. We don't have a fireplace. So I'm not just going to go ahead and start a fire in our kitchen table. That's ridiculous. Not only is it ridiculous, it's incredibly destructive. In a fireplace, awesome. Incredibly awesome. It does a lot of good. It creates experiences. Outside of that fireplace, extraordinarily destructive. We will burn our house down. You guys catch it? That's what God is saying. I've created it, and it is beautiful and perfect here. And here's why. God, and I don't understand this. The biblical writers say it's a mystery to us. We don't understand how this works, but somehow, the way God creates this, when two people engage in this, they become one. They become one flesh. We're going to come back to that in just a second when we go back to some of these verses. But let's take a look at this. Flee sexual immorality. Anything sexual, anything sensual outside of the context of marriage. So what is sexual? Because our culture has a very different definition than we do. Have you ever thought about it? How do you know where, if you're going to draw guidelines, guardrails in relationships or in your personal life, how do you know where to do that? What is sexual? Let me just throw something out. I know this is going to gross you out for a second. Hang with me. What if you ask this question yourself in your relationships? Would I do this same thing with my brother or sister? There's some faces out there that are cracking me up right now. That is gross. Yeah, it's gross. Would you hold hands with your brother or sister? Maybe. Yeah, I see people, you know, we're family. It's all right. Would you, peck on the cheeks? Absolutely. Peck on the lips. I've seen families do that. It's no big deal. It's love. Would you make out with your brother? I'm going to throw that out there. That is gross. How much? Oh, that's wrong. Why is it gross? It's sexual. I'm not saying that's the defining moment for you, but I'm saying, have you evaluated that? We have to evaluate those things. There are certain things that we may not want to admit, but we will acknowledge if you really think through it. And I know this is maybe making some people uncomfortable because, man, like, yeah, God's saying flee sexual immorality. Absolutely, I agree with that. But what I do isn't immoral. Is it sexuality outside the context of marriage? God says, run away from it. So let's go back. Why does he have us do that? Why does he have us do that? We're just going to jump back a couple verses to 15, verse 15. I'm going to pause there. We're going to go back actually. 18. We're going to finish 18. We need to finish it. Flee from sexual immorality. It tells us that. Flee from it. Anything sexual, sensual outside the context of marriage, because God's created it for that, and it's perfect and awesome there. Anything outside of that, run from it. Get away from it. He talks about this in a way I think that we need to grasp a hold of it, and our culture would understand this, would acknowledge this, if they'd really be honest with themselves. Any sin a man commits outside of anything, all other sins, sorry. I'm getting wrapped up. I've done 2 messages. All other sins a man commits are outside his body. All other sins. Everything else. All other sins are outside of man's body. But the person who sins sexually sins against his own body. That's why you can, maybe years later, you've messed up in some way. That's why you can kind of joke about, laugh about stuff that you've messed up in terms of like maybe lying, disobedience, stealing, cheating. Those things that we know are wrong, we've done, and years later, we can kind of like, yeah, I messed up, but it's over, no big deal. But sexual sin, man, we can't get past that, right? Like there's just something that we want to hide about, something that we don't want to throw out in the open. Now, and I know this too, that we have serious, deep regrets from the things that we do. Here's what's sad, we bought into this thing from culture. We bought a lie that says it's just a thing. And we don't understand that oftentimes it may not affect us in the lifespan you're in right now, the lifespan that you're in right now. It may not affect you here, but it will later. And I did not talk to one single person that said that's regretted waiting until marriage. I've not met one person that said, man, if I just had way more sex when I was younger, my marriage would be way better. No! Why? Because it doesn't work. No one said, man, if I just experimented more, man, my relationship with my kids would be better. No! No one says that because it doesn't work. Period. There's something that attaches itself inside of us, and that's why we're going to go back to this. And this is why it attaches us. Verse 15. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ himself? You are a part of Christ yourself. So he's speaking specifically to this temple worship with these guys are going with prostitutes and stuff, but it applies to sexual immorality, period. That's what he's talking about. Shall I then take the members of Christ? Shall I take Christ and unite? Now catch unite. Unite means to glue, permanently fix, attach, in such a way that you cannot remove, or if you do remove, it's going to remove a piece of you with it. Permanently attach Christ to a prostitute. That's the language that he's using. When you engage here in sexual relationships, when you start taking a hold of what cultures have taught us about this stuff, you are permanently attaching yourself to someone else, which is, in the context of marriage, beautiful and perfect, and outside of it, incredibly destructive. Catch what's happening here. And he says, it's kind of like, man, you guys just understand, you don't know, do you? Like, man, no, it's just physical, it's just a thing we do. Like, it's no big deal. And Paul's like, no, you don't know. It's permanent. There's this mystery to the way God's created us, that when we engage in those activities, it's not just an activity, it's a soul thing. There's something that connects deep inside of us to that person, and God's created it, catch this, so that we can understand what intimacy is about, even in a broken world. He's created this thing that's so incredibly powerful that's supposed to reflect our relationship with Him. And we can experience that with someone else, and yet when we take that out of that context, it is destructive. Incredibly destructive. And when you do that activity still connects you permanently, unites, fixes you to that person. And you cannot pull apart, separate, break that without it pulling stuff out of you, without affecting you deep down inside. And I know that if you've been there, you've messed up, you feel that. I know that. I've talked to enough students to recognize that. I'm experiencing things in my own life that I see that taking place. That's why he's saying, run from this stuff. Flee from it. the two will become one flesh. He talks about that from the very beginning. I had this illustration that was given to me when I was in high school. I really didn't understand it until I was married. I fully understood it on my wedding. It's kind of like your life, you've been given a rose. And as you move through life, and as you make these connections with people, it's like every time you give a part of you away sexually, it's kind of like you take off a petal of that rose and you hand it to that person. And then you do it again, hand you another piece of that rose to this person. And then you break up, so you go to someone else and you do that again. And when we get married, we want somebody that is awesome and perfect and pure. And we want, when we get married, it's kind of like you give each other your rose, that full self. And if you've been handing out pieces of yourself all along, it's like you have this little twig. It's what I got left. Here you go. And then you marry somebody that hopefully, Lord willing, is providing protection in their life, and they hand you this beautiful full rose, and that exchange takes place, and it's like, man, it's gut-wrenching. It tears you up to recognize it, like, man, if I only waited. There's this soul thing that takes place. It's not just physical. It's not just an activity. There's this deep connection that we don't understand, but it works and it happens. And God's created us. And it is powerfully destructive when taken out of that context. And I want you guys to catch this. What would life be like if you began living life this way? What would your future marriage look like? If instead of it being just a thing we do, no, this is the thing I'm going to do with my spouse, the person I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. What if it was just their thing? What would your marriage look like? What would your relationships with your kids look like? What would our culture look like if we adopted this as a culture? I just check. I'm just going to throw this out there. You check this out. The impact of premarital sex on divorce rates. It's ridiculous. Side note, I want to correct this because there's been a kind of statistic that's been thrown around, and as I've been kind of working through this, I found a research that was done that corrected this, that Christian couples, the divorce rate in Christian families are the same as non-Christians. And there was some research that was done recently that found out that is not true. They found out that, think about this, most Americans will associate themselves as Christians. Like 80% of Americans will associate themselves as Christians, but they don't practice this faith. They just, this is what my family's Christian, my family Catholics, and I'm Catholic, or my family's Protestant, and I'm Protestant, or we always went to Baptist church, so that's what I am. But they don't actually live this stuff out. And I found out this research that was done lately that's the divorce rates of practicing Christians are 35 or 36% lower than non-Christians. Which means that if a non-Christian is at 50%, which is a typical divorce rate, practicing Christians were at like 20%. So you have a 50% chance of living this stuff out and then experiencing wholeness in your marriage, or a 80% chance. The message that was sent with the statistic that the Christians are the same way is that living this stuff out, living life as a Christian, really doesn't impact your marriages. It doesn't have an effect. It's going to be the same regardless. No, it's not. If you live this out, it is drastically different. But you have to live it out. Not just claim to be a Christian. You have to live these concepts out. What would your life be like? Let's kind of, we're going to transition. I want to be real practical. And I want you guys to know that I understand the objection to this. You're going to go back to culture. Some of these guardrails that I'm going to throw out are kind of goofy, but all of these actually have been through conversations I've had in the past week with students. All of them have been. They're coming from students saying, hey, either we do this, or this would be a really good idea, or I wish I did do this. These are all coming from you guys, understanding what are the things that need to set in place for this. So before we get into guardrails, I want to throw out some strategies for establishing guardrails. We're going to really break this out next week, but I want to just throw out a couple tips for you guys. One, establish guardrails before you get into a dating relationship with someone. Before. Or, if you're already in that relationship, I'm giving you common grounds here to establish guardrails now. Have that conversation. But if you wait until you're already in a situation, it's going to be really tough to backtrack that. Establish guardrails now, or before you get into a relationship. Or even if it's not a relationship piece, work through your life in terms of like pornography and the way you use the internet and your phone and all this other kind of stuff. Establish guardrails now. Work through them. That's just a tip. This is going to freak you out, and that's okay, but I understand this from conversations I've had, personal and with students. Involve your parents. Let them know, hey, I'm trying to set up guardrails in my life, and these are what they are. They will help you out with that. Involve them. Talk to them about, hey, what do I need to do with this? Involve your parents. I get that it's kind of weird to have conversations sometimes with parents. I get that about those things. So here's another one. Find a neutral person who's older. I'm saying like just older, not necessarily a peer, just somebody that's older. Just the idea of them being older is they've walked through this stuff before. And maybe they can give you insight that you don't have yet. Find somebody who's older, who's neutral, who you can go and talk to. I have been that for a lot of guys here. Know your guardrail gaps. Reflect. What are the things that, as I moved into life, that man, I messed up here? What were the things that led up to it? What emotions were at play? Were you stressed? Were you tired? Were you super busy? Were you bored? Know those things. And then here's a really good one that I actually know a group of guys doing this right now. Have a little 911 text message code to one of your friends. It doesn't have to be 911. That might freak somebody out too. But like bananas. I don't know. Just throw that out to them. And they know that when they get that text, it's their job to call you and give you an out of whatever situation you're in. Establish that. As a group of friends, establish that little 911 text message like, bananas. Get you out of it. Doesn't have to be bananas. Just throw that one out there. Because it could be. Okay, I'm going to move through this really quickly. Because I think they're just good practices from you guys, good practice. I'm going to move these real quickly. You guys ready for this? Some guardrails. Never be one-on-one alone with that significant other or that person that you're, whatever, dating, wanting to go further with. Don't be one-on-one with them alone. Don't do it. You're setting yourself up there. I know that from the conversations I've had. That was like the biggest thing that everybody said. Or, this is a little addition to that, never be alone with other couples who don't have guardrails of their own. Because I know that just because you're with another couple doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to protect you from moving in a direction that you shouldn't be moving in. Because if they're okay with it and we're not sure, you don't have the protection. Another one somebody threw out, don't have late night conversations with that person because the conversation can go places that it shouldn't be going, you know what I'm saying? Or text messaging. Just cut it off, 10 o'clock, whatever it is. Just cut it off before that. And I'm not saying that just people in general, just those temptations. Watch for people waving red flags. Let me explain that. If there's people in your life that are like, hey man, you're messing up here, well, listen to them. Or if you have a friend that you know is in a dangerous relationship and they're messing up, wave the red flag. Help them out. If you care about them, have that conversation with them. The relationship you're in is not good. And I just want to let you know because I care about you. Wave that red flag. Listen to each other with that. This is more for like personal purity. Don't take your computer, your phone, your tablet, your iPad, your Kindle Fire, whatever. Don't take it into your room alone. Leave it out in the kitchen. Leave it out in the family room. If you're going to use it there. You're less tempted when you have family around. Or, as a personal practice, like I do this, if I know my wife's not going to be home, I won't take my computer home. If I know that, just won't even take it home. So it's not even there to be a temptation. Install software to protect you from the pornography stuff. Put it on there. There's a bunch of software out there that will email somebody accountability-wise, and they can have this conversation with you. Ask someone to check your phone or your computer randomly. And you go like, no, come on now. Just a friend who's not going to like blast it out, but just they'll help you out. They'll keep you accountable. And then I'm going to leave you this one last tip. Okay, because here's the hard part. Okay, I get it. I see the guardrails. Whether you're going to do it or not, these are just some random ones that people threw up. Whether you're going to do it or not, that's entirely up to you. But the question may be, how do I do that? I'm already in a relationship. I'm already in this mess or whatever. How do I get out of it? I'm going to give you one tip, and I'm going to give Sam Justice, who's not here, but I'm going to use him as an illustration that really worked just 2 weeks ago. He wasn't in a physical relationship. He was just he had liked this girl. She didn't go here. Here's the tip. Cut it off. Just cut it off. You don't have to beat around the bush. You don't have to be nice about it. Sometimes you may even have to be rude to make that happen. Here's what I told Sam. Sam was really into this girl. She was leading him on this whole time. She was flirting with him a lot, whatever. And I asked Sam to share this, so he's cool with this. He knows this. But she had given him this friendship bracelet. He had it on his wrist. And we were having this conversation. He's like, I'm so frustrated. He's like, I like her, and every time she flirts with me like crazy, and then she just ignores me. He's like, fooling me. And I'm like, what's up? What is that? He's like, she gave it to me. It's a friendship bracelet. It's like, you mean a handcuff? I just call it like I see it. I said, dude, you understand that she's got you in bondage right now. And you are not going to move forward until you cut it off. And he's like, that's mean. I can't do that. And he's like, well, I know I should. I'll do it later. Do it now. Do you want out of this or not? Do it now. And I handed him scissors. He's like, are you serious? I said, yes. Do you want out of it or not? You cut it off. I was like, whoa. Sorry. And you guys don't do that. You know what happened? There was something physically attached to him that was keeping him in bondage emotionally and in this relationship that he knew wasn't helping him. And the moment he cut it off, all of a sudden, I don't know what it was, but it was just cutting that physical thing off. It released him. And all of a sudden he was like, I'm done with this. I've made up my mind. I did a physical activity, I cut that thing off, and I am out of that relationship. And he did. He's still friends with that girl. But I don't know what, it was just this cut, he cut it off. And I'm telling you, you need to do that. If you're wanting out of that, there's no easy way to have that conversation. A little side tip here. If someone's having that conversation with you because you're in their relationship and they want out of it, let them out. Because what's at stake is something far greater than just some random consequences that you may have. It is eating you up inside. There's an intimacy thing that God has created for sex to be a part of the marriage relationship. That when you take that out of that marriage relationship, it's destructive. So I'm going to leave you this one thing here. I threw that out on the table. There it is. So we're going to go back to what we originally talked about with this whole guardrails thing. Solomon's promise, Solomon's warning. You can surround yourself with wise people, you can become wise, and you can live life like life's connected, and you can see that the decisions I make now are going to affect the things that I do in the future, and the relationships I have in the future. Or you can know right and wrong, and who cares, I'm going to do it anyway. And Solomon's promise is you will suffer harm. Not even making those decisions, but just by being around people who do. That's the promise. That's the warning. And I know this is a tough conversation, but this is critical. So you're moving forward and having healthy relationships. Next week we're going to be talking about really how do I determine where other places in my life I need guardrails. And how do they not, they don't just provide protection, they also provide direction in your life. And I want to walk through that next week. But here's what I also want to do. As you're having conversations, class, friends, whatever, about all of this stuff, and about sexual relationships, about all of these other kinds of things that are happening, if you have questions about anything, how do I do this? What does this look like? I want you to, you can talk to your teachers about it, they'll pass that question on to me. You can email me, you can leave a note on my desk in my office, my door's almost always open. You can come and ask me personally and I'll try to write it down. You will remain completely anonymous, but we'll spend some time next week just addressing some of those questions and just working through some of this stuff. And I want to leave you guys with that. Please take advantage of it, and we'll utilize the time, some of the time in here to work through some of those questions and really provide direction. Let me pray for you guys. Now this is tough. And we live in a culture that thinks this is just impractical and it's irrelevant and it doesn't matter about it. But I know